My husband and mother-in-law thought the house belonged to them when they threatened me with divorce, but they forgot one thing. The house was my inheritance. Now they can move in together and continue their sick relationship. I am Katie, a 30-year-old office worker who somehow ended up in a situation worthy of a TV comedy. I am a hard-working woman. That's me, married to a man who is still tied to his mother's apron strings. That is my husband, Gary, and a mother-in-law who thinks she is the Queen of England. I know what you are thinking. Katie, darling, why did you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently dumb. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true. Tall, handsome, and capable of forming complete sentences, something rare in the wild jungle of higher education. A few years later, here I am, living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter, a house I inherited from my father. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, hold on tight because this is where it gets interesting. You see, my dear husband and his loving mother seem to be under the impression that this beautiful, spacious house, worth every penny of those $2 million, was thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. But before I reveal the juicy details of how I got away with the scam of the century, let me take you on a journey through the hilarious, frustrating, and frankly absurd events that led me to the moment I finally decided to drop the most epic truth bomb. I was a hopeful college student with high expectations when I met Gary. Armed with nothing but a dream, a stack of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee, Gary walked into my life like a knight in shining armor, if that armor were made of football jerseys and beer cans. Our eyes met in a crowded classroom, and it was love at first sight. Well, okay, it wasn't that romantic. Actually, he spilled his energy drink on my notes, and I might have said a few words to him that would make a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like ruined notes and sticky fingers, right? From that moment on, we were inseparable. The first hint of Gary's peculiar relationship with his mother came on our third date. Picture the scene: candlelight dinner, soft music, and the two of us gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Suddenly, Gary's phone rings. Does he ignore it like any sane person on a date would? Oh no, our Gary practically dives across the table to answer it. "Hi, Mom," he says with all the enthusiasm of a Labrador seeing its owner after 5 minutes of separation. What followed was a 15-minute conversation about whether he had remembered to pack his lucky underwear for finals week. I wish I were joking. I really do. But did I run for the hills like any self-respecting woman would? I didn't. I sat there sipping my cheap, warm wine thinking, how sweet, he loves his mom. Past Katie, if I could go back in time and slap some sense into you, I would, and hard. Years go by, and suddenly we are engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a hidden ring, a botched proposal speech that mentioned his mother no less than 5 times, and me, in my infinite wisdom, saying yes. The wedding planning phase was an experience, and by experience, I mean a nightmare sprinkled with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. So friends, this is where Carol really started to shine. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the flavor of the cake, had to be approved by Carol. God forbid we chose lilac instead of lavender for the bridesmaids' dresses. Carol almost had an aneurysm over that. And Gary? Well, he was as useful as a chocolate teapot. Every time I tried to ask for his opinion on something, he would shrug and say, "Whatever you and Mom think is best, honey." I should have known then that I wasn't just marrying Gary, but entering into a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. But the real fun began when we started house hunting. Most couples look for a house together, maybe bring along a real estate agent or a trusted friend for a second opinion. Not us. That would be too normal. We brought Carol. But the final blow was when we finally found a house we all approved of. And by we all, I mean Carol gave her okay, and I was already too exhausted to keep arguing. While we were in the living room, Carol turned to Gary with tears in her eyes and said, "Oh, honey, I can see our family gathered here on Christmas morning." Our family, not your family, our. I was standing right there, and somehow I had already been erased from the picture. Did Gary correct her? Of course not. He simply nodded, probably imagining himself in footy bear pajamas opening presents while his adored mommy watched him with shining eyes. By now, you are probably wondering why I didn't run away. Believe me, I have asked myself that question approximately 37,042 times since then. But love, sleep deprivation from so many house viewings, and the sunk cost fallacy are a dangerous combination. So, against all better judgment and probably several laws of nature, we got married. The wedding was, well, let's just say if you look up the word circus in the dictionary, you would find a picture of our bridal party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that right. White at her son's wedding. When I pointed it out to Gary, he just shrugged and said, "Mom says it's more of an off-white." Really? Off-white my foot. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm, but we made it. We said our I-do's, cut the cake, and embarked on our new life together. And by together, I mean with the constant presence of Carol lurking in the background. Now you would think that once we were married and settled in our new house, the one Carol picked out, remember? Things would calm down. No. Married life with Gary was like being in a 3-legged race, except the third leg was Carol's, and she was always trying to trip me. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free in Gary's head and dictating every aspect of our lives. Wanted to buy a new sofa? Better run it by Carol first. Thinking of trying a new recipe for dinner? Oh no, Gary only likes meals the way his mother makes them. Wanted to paint the guest room? Calm down, young lady. Maybe Carol wouldn't like that color scheme. And before I knew it, I was pregnant. Now, most women enjoy their pregnancies. They have baby showers, decorate the nursery, and bask in the glow of impending motherhood. I enjoyed Carol's constant commentary on everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you are expecting precious Gary Jr., you can no longer make decisions for yourself. Oh, Katie, should you really be drinking coffee? I never touched that junk when I was pregnant with Gary. Well, maybe that explains how Gary turned out then. Katie, dear, are you sure you want to paint the baby's room that color? Studies show it could affect the baby's cognitive development. Again, Gary seems to have tasted some of that paint too. And Gary nodded along with everything his mother said. I swear, if Carol had told him that standing on his head and singing "I'm a Little Teapot" would ensure a healthy baby, he would have been upside down singing nursery rhymes before you could say umbilical cord. The day I went into labor was quite an experience. I was huffing and puffing, trying not to curse every man on the planet, and guess who walked into the delivery room? Carol. Gary had called her before he called the hospital. No joke. His first instinct when his wife went into labor was to call his mommy. I would say I was surprised, but by that point, I was too busy trying to give birth to Care. There I was, bringing a new life into the world, with my husband on one side looking like he was going to pass out at any moment, and my mother-in-law on the other offering pearls of wisdom like, "Now, Katie, when I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make half this much noise. Having a baby only gave Carol more ammunition. Now, not only was I a bad wife, I was also a bad mother. Every decision I made was wrong. I wasn't feeding the baby right. I wasn't changing her correctly. I wasn't singing the right songs. It was an endless avalanche of criticism, all delivered with that sugary smile that made me fantasize about pushing her into a vat of wet cement. Quickly, Gary was delighted. He had his mommy and his daughter under the same roof. The fact that his wife was losing her mind seemed to completely escape him. It was around this time that I realized I needed to make a change. Not for my sake, oh no, I was already too far gone, but for my daughter. I refused to raise a girl who thought it was normal for her father to consult his mother for every decision. I refused to let her grow up believing her worth depended on how well she met her grandmother's impossible standards. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I changed jobs. Yes, you read that right. I quit my well-paying, stable job with irregular hours for a position that paid less, but gave me more time at home because I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way Gary never would be. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that decision. Oh, Katie, are you sure that's a good idea? How are you going to maintain Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if Gary's lifestyle of playing video games and consulting his mom about which socks to wear required a six-figure income to maintain. But I stood my ground. For the first time since I met Gary, I made a decision without considering what he or Carol might think. But don't worry, this isn't the end of the story. Oh no, we are just getting started. Remember that $2 million house I mentioned? That's where things really start to get interesting. But more on that later. For now, I need a good stiff drink and possibly a lobotomy to forget the image of Carol in her off-white wedding dress. Update 1. Last time I left you with the birth of my daughter and my brilliant decision to change jobs. Now let's fast forward a bit to when things really started to heat up. There we were, a happy family of 3, or 4 if you count Carol, which apparently Gary always did. Our daughter was growing faster than Gary's pile of dirty laundry, and we started feeling a bit cramped in our current place. You know, the house Carol had so generously chosen for us newlyweds. One fine day, over a breakfast of burnt toast, my dear husband said something to me that almost made me choke on my charcoal-flavored crust. "Honey," he said with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, "I've been thinking, Mom is getting older and I'm worried about her future. What if we look for a place where we can all live together?" Now, I pride myself on being a reasonable person. I had endured Carol's constant meddling, Gary's inability to make decisions without consulting the mothership, but this was too much. I tried to reason with him. I pointed out that Carol was aging like fine wine full of preservatives and would probably outlive us all. I reminded him that we valued our privacy. But no, Gary was determined. He had a whole speech prepared about family values and taking care of our elders. I'm pretty sure Carol had written it for him and made him practice in front of a mirror. I was faced with a choice: accept living with the woman who had made it her life's mission to criticize every aspect of my existence, or be the evil daughter-in-law who denied sweet Carol the joy of watching her granddaughter grow up. But your friend Katie is not one to give up without a fight. Oh no, I put on my big girl pants and proposed a compromise. We would look for a house, sure, but it would be close to Carol's current house, not in it. Close enough for frequent visits, but far enough away that I could pretend the doorbell was broken when I needed a sanity break. Surprisingly, Gary agreed. I suspect he was just relieved I hadn't filed for an immediate divorce or had him committed to a psych ward for even suggesting we live with his mother. Now, remember how I mentioned earlier that I inherited a house from my father? Well, this is where things get interesting. You see, I hadn't told Gary about this little inheritance. Why, you ask? Well, partly because I knew the moment Carol found out, she would be redecorating the place in her mind. But mostly because, well, I guess I wanted something that was just mine. So I suggested we look for houses in the area where the property I inherited happened to be located. Gary suspected nothing. He was too busy making sure every property we looked at had a suitable room for his mother's extended stays. We finally decided on a house. And when I say we decided, I mean I managed to convince Gary and Carol that the house I had inherited was on the market and was perfect for us. Because of course, having a bigger house didn't deter Carol. It just just gave her more space to spread her special brand of crazy. She started visiting us all the time. At first, it was just once a week, then two, then every other day. Soon I was looking for excuses to work late just to avoid coming home to find her rearranging my cupboards or giving me lectures on the proper way to fold fitted sheets. Gary was thrilled. He had his mom always around, pampering him, cooking his favorite meals, and generally treating him like he was still a 12-year-old boy who needed his mom to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. About 3 months after we moved in, I came home one day to find that Carol had let herself in and was in the middle of repainting our living room. "Oh, Katie, you're here," she said cheerfully, as if breaking into someone's house and redecorating it was completely normal. "I hope you don't mind, but that almond color was so boring, I thought a nice mauve would liven it up. Mommy, look what Grandma got me." And there, in my daughter's arms, was the ugliest, frumpiest dress I had ever seen. My daughter loved it. Looking at my mauve walls, my beaming daughter, and Carol's smug face, I realized something had to change. And since it's legally frowned upon to throw your mother-in-law out a window, I knew the one who had to change was me. It all started with a phone call from my mom. Now let me take a moment to appreciate my mother. Compared to Carol, she's a saint. She calls me once a week, remembers my birthday without Facebook reminding her, and has never insinuated that her way of loading the dishwasher is superior to mine. But this call was different. Her health and my dad's had been declining for a while, and things had taken a turn for the worse. They were having a hard time taking care of themselves. I really needed to help. I did what any good daughter would do. I adjusted my work schedule, kissed my daughter, and prepared to split my time between my house and my parents' house. Gary's response was what you'd expect. He muttered something about how hard it would be for him to manage without me, as if he were the one balancing a job, a daughter, and 2 sick parents. He even had the nerve to suggest that maybe Carol could come stay with us full-time to help, but I didn't have time for a tantrum. I had parents to care for, a daughter to raise, and a job to keep. So I did what women have done since the beginning of time. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and moved forward. What I didn't expect was Carol's reaction to my new schedule. You'd think she'd be thrilled. After all, I was out of the house more often, which gave her free rein to redecorate as she pleased and pamper her precious boy. But no, to her, the fact that I was prioritizing my own parents meant that somehow I was neglecting my duties as a wife and mother. I wasn't spending enough time with my daughter, the house was messy, Gary was eating too much takeout. It all exploded one night when I came home late from my parents' house, exhausted and emotionally drained, and found Carol in my kitchen with her lips pursed in disapproval. "Katie," she said in that sugary voice that made me want to commit felonies, "I think we need to talk about your priorities." And there, Reddit darlings, I will leave you for now, because what happened next, well, that's a whole other story. Update 2. I was in my kitchen, so tired I could barely see straight. I had spent the day bouncing between work calls, changing my dad's IV, and trying to convince my mom that she needed to eat something other than stale crackers and sadness. And now here was Carol, glaring at me and accusing me. What came out of my mouth was a tidal wave of frustration, rage, and enough swear words to invent new curses. It was as if a dam had broken, and years of pent-up resentment spilled over. Carol did not take it well. Her face went through more colors than a chameleon in a bag of candy. Then Gary walked in. Was he ready to defend my honor and put his mother in her place? Of course not. Gary took one look at the scene, his wife red with fury and possibly foaming at the mouth, and his precious mom looking like she was going to faint onto the nearest sofa. And guess what he did? He took her side. In the great showdown between his wife and his mother, Gary chose his mom. He started giving me a speech about respect, family values, and how I was tearing this family apart with my selfish behavior. But Gary wasn't done. Oh no, he saved the best for last. In a move that I'm sure he thought was his trump card, he dropped this little gem. "If you ever wanted a divorce, you and our daughter couldn't make it on your own. Do you understand?" Oh, my sweet Gary, you just screwed up monumentally. I burst out laughing. Gary and Carol looked at me like I had finally lost my mind, and maybe I had. But in losing it, I also found something. My spine. Once I could breathe again, I straightened up, looked Gary dead in the eye, and said, "Honey, who said I'd be the one who wouldn't make it?" The confusion on their faces was priceless. You could practically see the hamster wheels turning in their heads trying to process what I had just said, and that's when I dropped the biggest truth bomb. I told them everything about the house, about how it wasn't just any house, but a $2 million property I had inherited from my father, about how every mortgage payment, every tax bill, and every leaky faucet repair had been paid with my money. Gary's face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Carol, on the other hand, went through shock, outrage, and then settled into a kind of calculating interest that gave me the creeps. But I wasn't done. I was on a roll, and nothing short of an act of God was going to shut me up. I explained it all. How I had been biting my tongue for years, putting up with Carol's interference and Gary's lack of a backbone. How I had changed jobs, sacrificed my career, and bent over backward to accommodate all their whims. And for what? To be treated like a glorified maid in my own home? I made it very clear that things were going to change. No more surprise visits from Carol. No more redecorating without my permission. No more treating me like a charity case who should be grateful for the crumbs of affection they decided to toss my way. And to Gary, I made it clear he had a choice to make. He could start acting like a husband and a father, or he could pack his bags and go live with his beloved mommy, because I was done. Carol, predictably, burst into crocodile tears. She wailed that she had only wanted the best for the family, that she couldn't believe I had deceived them. How could I be so cruel to poor, sweet sweet Gary. Gary, for his part, looked like he had been hit by a truck. He babbled, stuttered, and even tried to argue that surely, as my husband, he had some claim to the house. I did what any sensible woman would do in my situation. I called a lawyer, the kind of lawyer that makes other lawyers wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Because if Gary thought he was going to intimidate me with threats of divorce, he was in for a surprise. My lawyer assured me that not only was the house completely mine, but if Gary wanted to push for a divorce, he'd be lucky if he left with anything more than the clothes on his back. Of course, this is real life and not a movie, so things didn't magically resolve themselves overnight. Gary, in a surprising display of survival instinct, seemed to realize he had messed up big time. He started talking about couples therapy, fixing things, how much he loved me and our daughter. As for Carol, well, let's just say she didn't take her new status as persona non grata very well. She tried everything: emotional blackmail, love bombing, even a half-hearted attempt at an apology. But I stood my ground, my house, my rules. And my rules said no more Carol. I realized that by standing up for myself, by refusing to be a welcome mat ever again, I was teaching my daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that she deserves respect, that she doesn't have to put up with anyone's abuse, not even from family, especially not from family. Now, I know you are dying to know what happened next. Well, my curious darlings, that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say life is interesting, challenging, yes, but also liberating in a way I never thought possible. I am rediscovering who I am without Gary's expectations and Carol's constant criticism weighing me down. So if you are out there dealing with your own Gary or Carol, remember this: you are worth more than you believe, you deserve more than you think, and sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is stand up and say, no more. Edit. Holy cow, this blew up overnight. I can't believe how many of you are so invested in my drama. Your comments and messages have me alternating between laughing out loud and ugly crying into my glass of wine. Thank you all for the support, the advice, and the truly creative suggestions on what I should do with Carol's house key. No, I am not going to superglue it inside a fish and mail it to her, although the temptation is strong. To answer some common questions, yes, I am keeping the house. It is legally mine, and no tantrum from baby Gary is going to change that. No, I haven't kicked Gary out yet. We are in a weird sort of limbo where he is trying to convince me he can change, and I am trying to decide if I even want him to. Carol is forbidden from stepping foot in the house for the time being. I've informed her that if she shows up uninvited again, I won't hesitate to call the police. The chronic resting bitch face she pulled was epic. Believe me, to the many people asking for Carol's number because she sounds attractive, please seek help. Seriously, yes, I have changed the locks and the security code. For those asking about my daughter, she is fine. Kids are resilient, and I am making sure she knows none of this is her fault. In fact, she seems happier since Carol's visit stopped. What a surprise. And finally, to the person who suggested I write a book, don't tempt me. 50 Shades of Mauve, a mother-in-law story, has a nice ring to it, right? Thanks again, Reddit. Your support means more than you know. I'll update when I can, but for now, I have a life to rebuild and a lot of mauve to paint over. Update 3. I am back because I know how much you have been waiting for the conclusion of this story and the wonderful marriage I had. If you catch the sarcasm, I bet you wanted to know if Gary stayed with me or his beloved mommy. Well, let me tell you that he really never had a choice. Although honestly, if he had, he surely would have chosen his mother. Luckily, shortly after my last update, the divorce papers were ready to be served to him. Gary's face when he received the papers was just as funny as you imagine. A mix of shock, worry, and confusion, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. He acted as if the divorce was the strangest thing in the world, as if he hadn't seen it coming. But honestly, the truly strange thing is that I hadn't filed for divorce much sooner. In fact, the weird part is that I even married him in the first place, or that I didn't run away the first time he showed clear signs of being a mama's boy. Along with the divorce papers came, as expected, an eviction notice. I wasn't going to let him keep living in my house a day longer than necessary. The good news for him was that he didn't have to move very far. His new and old address was right where we all expected, his mom's house. Of course, I made that comment thinking it would be good news for him. I mean, what could be better than living with his beloved mother? Oddly enough, he wasn't amused. Why? No idea. I thought he would enjoy it, with all their emotional incest. Because it's only emotional, right? Fortunately, he didn't take long to leave. It only took him a few days to pack up and move out, probably because he already had some clothes at his mother's house. The reason? I don't want to know, nor do I care. Once he was gone, everything moved forward as it should. The divorce process took a few months, as these things usually do, but it was finally finalized. I kept the house because it was never marital property. It was an inheritance from my father. And for those asking, yes, it is possible to inherit something while the person is still alive. As for the rest of our belongings, we divided them fairly. But best of all, Gary now has to pay child support. This was a huge relief because I was starting to consider looking for a better paying job to support my daughter and me now that he is out of the equation. However, thanks to the child support, we can cover the difference without worrying too much. Plus, now that his mother can no longer enter this house or interfere in our lives, there are significant savings. It is amazing what you can achieve when you kick out an emotional parasite. As expected, Carol tried to come back. She wanted to come see her granddaughter, but I was very clear. If she wants to see her, she can do it during the time she spends with her dad. I made it clear that there is no place for her in this house. And yes, Maybe I was a bit harsh, but I told her that dangerous animals are not allowed here. The look on her face when I told her that was almost as good as Gary's when he received the divorce papers. As for the custody of our daughter, we reached an agreement. She spends the week with me and the weekends with her father. Although realistically, she spends that time mostly with her grandmother, since Gary is still living with Carol and hasn't made a single attempt to move out, even though several months have passed since he left my house. As for the rest, I must say things are much better now. Once you get rid of what is poisoning your life, everything starts to improve. It's like I had been carrying a backpack full of rocks for years, and dropping it suddenly makes everything easier. I no longer have to walk on eggshells in my own home, or live under the constant shadow of Carol's criticisms. My daughter is calmer, and although it can be difficult for her to have divorced parents, I think she also feels the difference without her grandmother's constant interference in our space. Now the house finally feels like my home. And in case you were wondering, yes, I finally got rid of every trace of mauve in the house. That paint was the first thing to go once Gary left. Freedom has a color, and I can assure you it is not mauve.